In this video, we're going to talk about working with lawyers. This is something we have to do a lot in HR, and that conversation is starting right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams and the host of HR Shop Talk. On the show, you get expert insight into HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or subscribe to the podcast to keep learning from my smart and experienced guests. Today, my guest is again Stuart Rudner. Stuart is a lawyer specializing in employment law based out of an office near Toronto. He has his own YouTube channel, actually, and I'll leave a link to that channel in the description. Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I am doing great, although crazy busy, as I was saying to you offline. But thank you again for having me back so soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. And this is a little bit of a pet episode for me. So, working with lawyers. I've worked with lawyers. HR has to work with lawyers a lot. So can you just provide an overview of some of the ways you're working with employers and in particular HR?
Yeah, and this is kind of a pet project for me as well. So I love this because I talk about this all the time, and I try to explain the value in working with an employee. And I'll say working with an employment lawyer as opposed to just working with a lawyer.
Okay,
that's one common mistake I think a lot of, especially smaller and mid-sized businesses make, is they have their corporate lawyer or their tax lawyer and they go to them for all the advice, but they're not getting specialized advice focused on employment law. And that's what HR needs.
Right.
It's interesting to hear you say that, HR spends a lot of time speaking with lawyers, because I find a lot of people don't. And sometimes it's out of your control. I hear this a lot where people say, I'd love to work with you or work with an employment lawyer, but our CFO, CEO, or someone said, we don't have the money, just do it yourself and deal with it yourself, which is, of course, a horrible position to put an HR person in, because with a few exceptions, you're not lawyers and you haven't gone to law school. And frankly, I'm amazed at all the other things that are underneath or in the basket that falls within HR. I guess I know you asked me about different ways that HR and lawyers can work together. I mean, I always start by saying that from a business perspective, from an HR perspective, you see an employment relationship, and we see a legal relationship, and that's why it works so well for us to work together, because everything that relates to this employment relationship can have legal implications, and so hiring to me is one of the biggest minefields. Dismissal is obviously the other one, but then it's everything in between, right? Discipline, performance management, accommodation request, leaves of absence. It's not as though an employment lawyer is going to replace HR, but when you work hand in hand, you can look at all those things. And frankly, what often happens is we're called in to put out a fire. There's a wrongful dismissal claim, there's a human rights allegation being made, or whatever's going on, or there's an investigation. So we'll help the client through that. And then ideally at the end of it, we can then debrief and figure out how the issue could have been prevented in the first place, which is really what we do a lot of. And back to your question, how we work with HR, what I think our whole team really enjoys is the strategic HR side of things. So how to reduce liability, how to reduce labor costs, how to maximize your rights. I mean, I think I'm sure everybody watching this show or this podcast knows that the employment laws in Canada are generally designed to protect employees, but there are ways that an employer can improve their position, and largely that's through contracts, policies, and procedures. So I like doing a lot of that with our clients. And when we go through the process of designing those, we also get the chance to get to know the organization, who they are, what their goals are, what their concerns are, and they get to know us as well. So by the time we're done, we've now got that ongoing relationship. And whenever an issue does arise, it's a quick phone call, or probably more likely these days, a quick email, and we can get it taken care of. So that's, that's often how we end up developing the relationship.
So question here, when should HR employ a lawyer? We can't, as some employers just don't want HR to be going and running to a lawyer all the time. There's a strong perception that lawyers are expensive and they're going to create extra process. And you have to learn to do it yourself, I think, at least a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, and your question is perfect, because you kind of identified the critical issue. Like, you want to be able to do a lot on your own, but you also don't want to make the mistake of doing everything on your own and then having to fix things later. So
yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's the ongoing dilemma. So
Yes.
I often say, look, we want to be your strategic partner. We want to be someone that you have an ongoing dialogue with, and not someone that you call when you absolutely have no other choice, and we talk once every 6 months or every year. And even if it's 5 minutes here or there, it can save you a whole lot of liability, a whole lot of costs going forward. So
Hmm.
like I developed a bit of a catchphrase on my show, which is if you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do.
Hmm.
So when it comes to cost, and we can talk a bit more about this, but part of the way to address that is knowing how to work with your lawyer, or more accurately, your law firm.
Hmm.
We're not a big firm, but we have a great team, and we have teammates with different levels of experience and
Hmm.
different hourly rates.
Hmm.
So one of the important things is, as much as I enjoy working with my clients, I often say, it makes more sense for you to call another member of our team, or for me to put you in touch with another member of our team to deal with this issue or this issue, because frankly, it doesn't make sense at my hourly rate to be advising you on that. So it can be
Hmm.
very cost effective if you do
Hmm.
it, if you're strategic, and also time wise. Sometimes it's like a last minute request. I'll get an urgent email at 10 o'clock saying we need this done before tomorrow morning. Well, then my ability to farm this out to somebody else is pretty limited, and I might have to do it myself. Whereas if I had a bit more notice, then I can get the right person on the job and make sure that it's
Hmm.
done cost effectively.
So, what are some common reasons people are avoiding lawyers besides cost, or even cost? And what's your comeback? Like, how do you respond to those concerns?
Yeah, look, by far and away the biggest reason is cost.
Yeah.
And again, there is that perception that lawyers are expensive. There is that
Yes.
feeling that every time I pick up the phone, every time I send an email, it's going to cost me. There's a few things I'll say. One is there's got to be value there. You're not calling your lawyer just for the sake of checking off a box and saying I called the lawyer. You're calling your lawyer to get some advice that will have a value. And as
Hmm.
long as the value proposition makes sense, then it's worthwhile.
Hmm.
So my point is, don't just focus on the cost. Don't just focus on the hourly rate as well, because this is often the question we get is,
Hmm.
well, you're $600 an hour and so is $450 an hour. Why wouldn't I go with them? And I always say that, the rate doesn't tell you the price, right? So it might take me an hour, it might take them 2 hours. So, and again, you said this before, a lot of it comes down to trust. And sometimes you go with your gut when you first meet someone and you feel comfortable with them and you start working with them. But then when you do start working with them, then you see how it goes. And if you find over time that the costs are not what they should be, well, then you probably need to look for a new lawyer, or at least discuss why with the employment lawyer.
Hmm.
Um, but anyways, just to kind of get back to how do you address the concern about the cost? I mean, I will be quite blunt in saying I really hate the billable hour. So I'm quite happy to get away from it as much as possible. And so our firm does a lot of work on fixed fees. Anything that is project based, we can do on a fixed fee or a cost estimate. We also have packages where we'll do contracts and policies together, and training as well. We'll package it. And the other thing we've started to do, I'd say over the last year or so, is the sort of subscription retainer type of idea where you pay a fixed monthly fee, and that gets you access to a whole lot of templates. It gets you regular updates of your contracts and your policies, so you don't have to worry that your policies are out of date.
Right.
And as well, it can usually include some amount of legal advice each month. So it's almost like prepaid, where you don't have to worry every time you pick up the phone to call. So look at alternative billing methods. That's another way to address the cost issue. And the other biggest objection, and I think HR and lawyers have a lot in common here, I think we're often seen as a barrier. We and HR are often
kidding, hey?
Yeah, we're often seen as the ones who say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, and finding other reasons why things can't be done.
Yes.
Which is obviously understandably frustrating for an employer, for management. So, it's one thing I've really tried to train our team is, rather than saying, no, you can't do that, explain why you don't recommend doing it, explain what the risks are. But at the end of the day, I always say this to our clients, they're not calling me because they have employment law questions that they want to answer. They're calling me because they have business decisions to make. And the employment law side is one part of it. So we might say, we don't recommend doing this for all these reasons. And then they might go ahead and say, well, for a whole bunch of other reasons, it's still the best option for us.
Mhm.
And that's fine to me. I mean, I just want our clients to make an informed decision, understand risk, and then decide. And then the key thing, and this is same for HR and for legal, is once the decision is made, just make sure to assist your client, internal or external, to implement the decision. So those are the two biggest concerns we get: cost and not being a barrier. Yeah.
Okay, so what advice do you have for choosing a lawyer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so I'll repeat a point I made earlier. I mean, when we're talking, obviously we're talking here in the context of HR, it should be someone with subject matter expertise. So in other words, an employment lawyer, not a corporate lawyer, not a general practitioner, not a family lawyer, not your cousin who does real estate law. It should be an employment lawyer. That should be the starting point.
Right.
And then once you get past that, I mean, you want someone who has experience in the type of work that you're looking for them to do, whether it's working with someone in manufacturing, whether it's working with a professional services firm, someone who has experience in that area. But I'll say probably most importantly, it's just that comfort level. You're going to meet someone, you're going to have that gut feeling. Are you comfortable with them? You have confidence in them. And then as you go forward, if you find that you're working with someone and you just aren't comfortable with how things are going, or you're scared to ask what or why or how or how much, then perhaps it isn't the best relationship. And so if you're not comfortable with the relationship, then either you need to have a serious discussion and get things back on track, or look elsewhere.
Sounds like picking a therapist.
Yeah, I often feel like a therapist when I'm talking to our clients and then listening to them complain about what they're dealing with. But our job is to help them figure out how to deal with them.
Subscribe if this has been helpful. And the question of today is, have you worked with lawyers, and what has bugged you about that relationship? Let us know in the comment section. Okay, so now let's say I've hired you. You're my lawyer. How do I make the most of that relationship?
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's where I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction. And I know you've asked the question of what bugs you about your relationship with your lawyer. Sometimes I find that the problem is that there isn't a relationship, right? I mean, they routine us to deal with one thing, and will make recommendations as to how they can improve their policies, contracts, processes, how they can put themselves in a better legal position. And we'll make a bunch of recommendations, and then there's radio silence, and they disappear. And then 6 months later, they'll call and say, "Oh, yeah, we've got an issue now." And it's sort of, and you can tell they're just trying to minimize the interaction to minimize the cost. But as a result, they're not giving us much information. They're not allowing us to do our job by giving them good advice. And then 2 years later, they'll say, "Oh, I've been working with this firm for 2 years, and they really haven't done anything for us." So that's not how to work with your employment lawyer. I guess be upfront with your lawyer, let them know what the good and the bad and the ugly, so we can deal with all that. And then once you've gone through that process, just keep us in the loop. So if things are going on, if there's going to be growth, if there's going to be cutbacks, if there's going to be downsizing, keep us in the loop so we can make sure that you're aware of any potential issues, and we can deal with them before rather than after. And then a couple of other things I'll mention. If we are working with HR, let us meet the other key players in the organization. It's good to know the CEO, the CFO, the COO, whoever else is involved. Not that we need to deal with them on a regular basis, but it's good to know who they are, and it's good for them to know who we are. And as well, we often come in and do training. Sometimes when we're talking about issues, you guys in HR usually understand what we're talking about. You usually understand the risks, but your frontline managers, your supervisors may not. And I'll give you a perfect example. A couple of years ago, we were talking about the hiring process, and we had one fairly large manufacturing plant that was a client. And we said, right now you've got your frontline managers doing the interviewing, and they are not trained to interview. They don't understand the legal risks, the human rights issues, what not to ask about. So we all agreed, okay, from now on, HR is going to do the interviews. Great. So what happened, and it's almost funny if it wasn't true, is that one of these managers was a little upset about being shut out of the process, and said, well, if I can't do the interview, can I at least walk the person from reception to the boardroom so I can at least get a feel for them? And as the HR manager said to me, later on in hindsight, my first thought was, well, what could go wrong? And of course, as we learned in that sort of 2-minute walk from reception to the boardroom, this manager probably hit on 4 or 5 protected grounds under the Human Rights Code. Because he, in fairness to him, he had no idea what he shouldn't be asking about. So we'll often come in and do training, and it's different training at different levels, but get everyone on the same page. So everyone knows what the issues are, and also get the buy-in so that you're not constantly fighting with whoever the powers that be are to get things done, or to get your employment lawyer involved, or to update your contracts or your policies. So again, we just become more a part of the team and not just someone you call when you absolutely have to. You know, to me, that's the best way to work with us is to get us to be part of the team.
And so what are some things that we should not do when working with lawyers?
Yes, I mean, the biggest thing is just to shut us out, to just only reach out every 6 months or a year when there's something that, you absolutely cannot avoid calling us. Making us part of the team is critical. And sort of along those lines, taking documents that we draft and then reusing them and modifying them and then reusing them and modifying them again. And the best example is contracts. We'll draft contract templates, and of course, we can't stop our clients from using them. And I don't say that you have to call us every single time you make an offer, but if you're going to make changes to the contract, if you're going to use them for different types of roles, it makes sense to have us review them. And I mean, the best example I can think of was probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, where we had a new client we were working with, and it became clear they were very, very cost conscious, and they wanted to deal with us as little as they had to.
Right.
So we drafted the contract template for their laborers and went through it and reviewed it and answered all their questions. And they said, okay, we'll take it from here. And they had a bunch of hiring coming up. And so about 3 or 4 months later, I know what it was. They called me because they had to get rid of one of the people they'd hired. I said, okay, well, send me a copy of their contract and then we can assess, how we deal with the termination. And I went through the contract and it was clearly our template, but when I went through it, there was something missing, which was the termination clause. They had just taken it out completely. So they had no protection whatsoever when it came to severance. And when I spoke to the head of HR and I said, I reviewed the contract, I was surprised to see, and I wasn't as specific as I probably could have been. I just said, I was surprised to see a few things missing. And he said, oh, yeah, we made a few small changes, but we kept it pretty well intact. I said, well, you made one massive change that removed probably the biggest reason to have a contract put in place. So don't make the changes. Don't keep reusing the same contract. Don't download a contract you find online and then adapt it to your company, because it's not going to give you the protection you need. And then the other point is just making decisions where you have that niggling voice we talked about.
Yes.
When you think you probably should call an employment lawyer, but you don't, that's a huge mistake, because then I'm not even going to say 9 times out of 10. Let's say 5 times out of 10, it's going to come back to haunt you. And it's going to cost you a lot more to fix it than it will to just avoid the issue altogether.
Okay. All right. Interesting. And I'm glad you clarified, like 5 times out of 10, sometimes you'll get away with it, but a lot of times you won't.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes it's 9 times out of 10 you will, and I've seen clients who it's almost like they just have good luck, but nothing ever comes back. But at one point, something will, and sometimes people say, "Well, I haven't been sued in 30 years of running a business," which is great. And it probably says a lot about how they run their business, but just once. And rather than spending what I'll say is, perhaps a few $1,000s to be proactive, you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to fix the problem. So it will even out over time.
Okay. So, often, employer reps are going to come to you with an outcome they want. Their heart is set on it. And I've had these clients as well in HR. So how do you deal with those?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier about not being a barrier. So, I'll often, clients will usually come with a goal in mind. And sometimes they have a goal in mind, but they're not as set on the way to get there. So that's what I usually try to delve into is, are you suggesting that we do X, Y, and Z because you really want to do X, Y, and Z, or just because you want to get to a certain point? And if it's just to get to a certain point, let's assess if there are other ways to do it that might be better. If it's that this is what they really want to do, then again, I'll assess what the purpose is, explain what the risks might be, and then at the end of the day, as long as they understand the risks, they'll make the business decision. And Sometimes there will be very good reason. I mean, best example from recent times is probably early on in the pandemic,
Right.
when a lot of businesses were looking at massive layoffs or temporary layoffs.
Yeah.
And I made the point that could be risky because they may not have the right to lay people off, and it could be a constructive dismissal, and then we have liability. But in many cases, they said, we understand. And they appreciate being told about it. They can't afford to keep paying these individuals when there's no revenue coming in. So they're going to make a business decision to go ahead anyways. And to me, that's the perfect scenario. They're making an informed decision. So as long as I let them know about the risks, and if there are other options, I'll make them aware of it, and then they'll decide.
Thanks, Stuart. I really appreciated this conversation. I did another episode with Stuart on the timely issue of vaccination policies, and that link is right here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.